recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Poe, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm over here on this side. I have an iPhone, and if I move from here and go over there and sit with my Democrat friends, which will make them real nervous, does Google track my movement? Does Google, through this phone, know that I have moved here and moved over to the left? It's either yes or no.
Not by default. There may be a Google service which you've opted into use, and if...
So Google knows that I am moving over there. It's not a trick question. You know, you make $100 million a year, you ought to be able to answer that question. Does Google know through this phone that I am moving over there and sit next to Mr. Johnson, which would make him real nervous? It's his question. It's yes or no.
I wouldn't be able to answer without looking at...
You can't say yes or no.
Without knowing more details, sir.
If I walk over there and sit next to Mr. Johnson and carry my phone, does Google know that I was sitting here and then I moved over there?
You're welcome anytime, Judge.
Yes or no?
I genuinely don't know without knowing
I'm
what
shocked
services...
you don't know. I think Google obviously does. Are you familiar with the General Data Protection Regulation by the European Union?
Very familiar. We worked over 18 months on it.
And the European Union is protecting the right of privacy of the people in Europe. We don't have such a law in the United States, do we?
Congressman, we have supported and...
We do not have such a law in the United States, do we?
We don't have a comprehensive user data privacy legislation.
Are you familiar with House Resolution 1039? It's a resolution that I've introduced that would basically adopt some of the European practices in America and give consumers in the United States the right of privacy. Are you familiar with that legislation?
No, but I'm happy.
I'll give you a copy before you leave. It's ironic to me that the United States, supposed to be the country in the world that protects privacy of individuals more than anybody else, we are playing second fiddle to the Europeans. They protect the privacy of their folks more than we do. I think the United States Congress needs to move in a direction to allow citizens to opt in to the dissemination of their information rather than opt out, which seems to be the current law. As Mr. Cohen has stated, I think most Americans don't know all the things that this phone can do. And one thing that it can do is disseminate information really that we are unaware of to all different people out there. The United States
is the issue of content and the issue of how that is stolen in many cases and how that could be worked on. Those are issues we'll deal with in another setting. We've talked about this. But I want to go through several questions because it's been discussed a lot about what you collect and what you don't collect. So the next few questions will be yes, no questions. I'm not trying to trick you here. It's simply what do you collect and how do you collect it, okay? In dealing with Google, do you or do you not collect identifiers like name, age, and address? Yes or no?
If you're creating an account, yes, and using an account, yes.
Yes. Specific search histories when a person types something into a search bar.
If you have search history turned on, yes.
Device identifiers like IP address or IMEI.
Depending on the situation, we could be collecting it, yes.
GPS signals, Wi-Fi signals, Bluetooth beacons.
You know, would depend on the specifics, but there may be situations, yes.
The GPS, yes.
Yes, if you have location.
Voice and conversations when using Google Voice products.
We give an option to turn on or off. And
but if a person didn't know it, voice and conversations when using Google Voice products.
Yes. We only record when they initiated with OK Google and then say the terms after.
Contents of emails and Google documents.
We store the data, but we don't read or look at your Gmail.
But you have access to them.
As a company, we have access to them, yes.
So you could. Saying you don't or don't. I'm not asking do you or don't. I'm saying you could, though there is a possibility.
We have clear established policies on how we would do that data.
And their privacy policies, speaking of that, has changed 28 times, including 8 times since January 2016. So I think the policies, and this is why I'm asking these questions. Is there any type or origin of data which Google would refuse to collect that is not already prohibited by laws like COPPA or HIPAA?
And there are many categories of information today. We are particular about anything to do with health data.
And those are covered under those. Anything that you would not collect outside of the two that I named, which are generally accepted as things you cannot collect.
There are many things which we don't collect. For example, we don't collect, you could have a product like Google Home. We won't collect conversations unless you specifically ask us to. So you ask a question. And so we definitely are very careful and minimize the data we need to provide the service back to our users.
I'm glad you mentioned data minimization. We'll get to that in just a second. How long do you keep the data that you have captured?
Today we give you the choice of whether you want to store the data or not. But if you store the data, from the time you turn it on, we store it for you.
Okay, well, let me ask a question here. For all this has been discussed, age identifiers, search histories, all these things, and for how many would you say, let me just say, you've made an interesting question. How many people actually understand that they can actually cut this off?
We remind people, and every day 20 million people come and make changes in these settings. So we see robust activity.
When you control 95% of searches, you control this in a very large way. I would say the vast majority, not the most sophisticated, not the ones in a certain age demographic, are not as familiar with this as, say, some who work in the industry or at least around the industry. Would that not be a fair statement?
If you could repeat that, Congressman, sorry.
I'll get back to it. Earlier it was said that identifiers such as age, name, and address are treated differently. If that is true, how are you treating them differently, and is the same data collection process still done? How is it treated differently than maybe some of these others that we have spoke of? That came, I think, from Mr. Deutsch's discussions, such as locators and things like that.
We offer different controls for that. So, for example, for location, we give specific controls. For your voice activity, we give specific controls. We are trying to meet users' expectations. And so, for example, some people may want their search history to be available, but they don't want YouTube history to be recorded. So we give those choices to our users.
One of the general dynamics of most of this tech industry and those who collect data is data minimization. You brought it up just a few minutes ago. The issue that I have, and it was in March of this year, a security researcher actually downloaded his, quote, Google Takeout. This is probably there. It was 5.5 gigabyte. This is not just a few names and addresses and where you went. Why, number one, does Google need all this information? We can answer that in the fact that 85%.
It's going to say that he said 5.5 gigabytes, which if you think of it data-based or text-based, just to give you an idea, the Bible only takes up 6 megabytes. That's how much text data is in the Bible, 6 megabytes. He's talking about 5.5 gigabytes of information in text or data form, which is obviously about, what would that be, 1,000 times bigger? So just to give a little context to how big that is.
86% of your revenue comes from advertising, so we know you manipulate the data in some ways. However, can you explain what you do to minimize this data, which is generally an accepted standard practice among those who collect data?
Our goal is, but we are providing, for example, if we are providing you a service like Gmail, which we have done for 15 years, that data, we need to store it for our users, so they expect us to. So we are trying hard to match users' expectations. We don't need, our data for advertising, as I said earlier, most of it comes from just the keywords you type. And so, we need minimal data to do advertising. We give you options to turn ads personalization off. We store most of the data we do today to help give users the experience they want, and that's what we're trying to do.
I'm going to go back to where I started. Perception is...
So I'm actually going to do a very interesting live video soon here of trying out Google, seeing if they can listen in on my microphone. I'm going to be actually doing this live. I'm going to take a new account on my PC. I'm going to make a new PC user on my computer, and it's going to be complete blank slate. If you understand how a new PC user is, it's actually essentially a blank slate. It's like having a new computer. And then I'm going to basically just talk about a certain particular topic out loud before I go to some various websites. I'm going to just go to some random websites, and I'm going to see if Google shows me advertisements on what I was speaking audibly, but I never typed into the computer, and see if it actually shows ads, because I saw some other guy do this, and it was pretty interesting what the results were. So I'm kind of curious, are they listening in on a microphone to what you have to say, because it's amazing if you go look into a lot of articles in this realm, particularly with Facebook. They know, they have uncanny understanding of where you went, people that were around you that you never met somehow suggest it to you in your Facebook. There's a lot of really interesting and strange things that seemingly occur that sort of magical, you know what I mean? Just knows things they shouldn't know about you. And, you know, I'm kind of curious. I wanted to do a few experiments like this on YouTube. And honestly, this guy, he's pretty good at dodging tricky questions and, you know, answering the other ones as best as he can. I think he's actually a pretty good spokesman for Google. I don't know. He's obviously pretty good at what he's doing there. So I think he's making himself look quite good, though, you know, honestly, I think there's a lot of things going on internally with Google that you're not aware of, I'm not aware of, and I'm sure they don't want us to know about it, okay? Let's just play a little bit more of this.
Reality, the amount of data being collected here, how it is being used, how you monetize, the one ad, basically the flow of information that you have, and the monetization of that is a concern. I think the perception of how it is used and from what side of the aisle is something that this committee, I think, will take up and continue to process. But I think when most people deal with this, what I said earlier, I'm not sure that in the broad scope of things, simply clicking yes, especially in a society today in which some of these things, and especially that was talked about mobile, which we've not delved into even further, is going to open up a much larger situation in which is not just simply monetizing data, it's actually using information that can be then used by either law enforcement or others in legal proceedings that can then be used against them, that they're not going to understand exactly what is going on.
Yeah, actually, there's been some situations already where people have had like an Amazon Alexa or a Google Home in their house, and there was some sort of domestic situation, and they were able to use that data to figure out what really happened. And yeah, so then there's also some other very strange technology out there now that's being used. I saw that they were using it with like in China on those who operate trains and some other odd jobs where they basically have these electrodes or whatever attached to your head to see what type of brain activity is going on while you're doing your job. And if there isn't a lot of brainwave activity going on, it means you're not alert in your job, which means you're doing a bad job, okay? And they actually penalize you if your brainwaves are not really, you know, flaring up. So could that be in the future as well? They'll actually be monitoring what you're thinking while you're on a job. I know this stuff sounds crazy at first glance, but you got to understand technology has been exploding, and a lot of people haven't really thought this through. And clearly we have a bunch of, and I'm not trying to be, you know, the fact of the matter, these guys are a lot older. They seemingly don't really understand what they're asking. Of course, this guy seems to know a lot more than these other guys. I showed that first guy there. He's like, if I take my phone and I walk over there, do you know that I walked over there? You know, he's like trying to say it. He's trying to sound smart and like he understands this technology. And I got you there, you know, Google CEO, I got you. And of course, this Google CEO knows all ins and outs of Google. He knows how to dodge all these questions. Oh, I don't know what's on your phone there. You know, Mr. Senator, of course they can track you over there. Most likely they will and are. Okay, he's not going to tell you that, though. But by default, you have these things turned on everywhere. You probably got 6 different versions of this turned on. You have to turn off like 6 different programs so they're not monitoring where you're at. Okay, yeah, that's the answer. They can't tell you that, of course. Can't tell you what... He's got to dodge the question. He's got to make Google look good, right? So let me know what you guys think in the comment section below, and thanks for watching.